What's up, guys? My name is John. I'm from Japanese Knife Imports. We are a really small Japanese knife focused store in Beverly Hills, but like not the douchey part of Beverly Hills, like the part away from all that kind of stuff, hidden away a little bit. Uh, Today, man, I'm here to teach you guys about knife sharpening and hopefully help you guys go from wherever level you are right now to having a really solid fundamental understanding of the concepts of knife sharpening, understanding what results you should be looking for, how to recognize them, what mistakes look like, how to recognize them, and what to do about them. So the goal here is not to get you to be like perfect at sharpening today. The goal here is to impart you with knowledge and experience that will allow you to then go back and sharpen your own knives and improve because you understand what's going on, what to look for, and what to do about it. So that is our goal today as we go about this. I brought some kind of like images to go along with the stuff I'm going to be talking about. If you want to follow along with that, feel free to grab a stack of those. You can write notes on them, whatever. They're yours. Keep them. I also brought my cards here. My email address is on here. Our website is like the QR code link on the back. You can hit me up with questions anytime. Call me, email me, come in and hang out, say what's up, have coffee with me, whatever. I'm there. I cooked for a long time professionally in fancy-ass restaurants, a lot of like the Michelin-y type stuff. And I found that there was a really like a lacking of these kind of educational things for me. I always felt like I had to go out and do stuff on my own. And so whenever I have an opportunity to do this kind of stuff, especially for cooks, I'm about it. I feel like it's a really cool thing. You know, we all have to work with knives every day. It's much easier when they're sharp. And honestly, for most of us, it's probably like a stupid little side hobby that we get into anyway. So might as well foster it. The way that I like to structure the class is this. We're going to go over first the fundamental concepts of sharpening, how it works, what things you need to be thinking about, what are the concepts that you need to understand. Then I'm going to try and demonstrate all of those things here so you can see what it looks like to do stuff well, what it looks like to make mistakes, what those mistakes are, how to recognize them, and what to do about them. And then we'll try and open it up for questions, or if you have like knives with you you're having trouble with, something like that, bring them over, let's take a look and try and problem solve those things together. Ideally, by the time we're done here, you guys will be able to look at your own stuff and figure out where things went wrong and understand what to do about it. And then just understand the rest is going to be a lot of practice and muscle memory. So, you know, be prepared, like everything else. All right, so let us start with first understanding what kinds of knives we're talking about. There are two main kinds of knives that we'll see in the context of Japanese knives. There are single bevel knives and double bevel knives. Today, we're going to focus on double bevel knives because that's the bulk of what you're going to be using here. So that's your chef's knife, gyuto, peri, tsujihiki, santoku, nakiri, all double bevel knives. Single bevel knives also exist, and some of you guys may use them. That would be like a yanagiba, deba, usuba. They're very different, and the kind of sharpening we do with them is also very different. I'm not going to focus as much on that today, but if you guys have questions about that kind of stuff, you want to go over those things, let me know, and I'll spend some time at the end going over that kind of stuff. My time is yours for the next little while, so let's try and take advantage of it. So, double bevel knives look something like this. This is the one we're going to sharpen on today. When you look at one side and you look at the other side, it looks pretty much the same, right? The bevel might be larger on one side than the other, but both sides, they look pretty much identical. Whenever you see that, chances are that's a double bevel knife. Single bevel knives, they look drastically different on one side than the other, right? One side has a large bevel, the other side appears flat, but it's somewhat hollow ground. It's got a flat rim all the way on the outside. When you see knives like this, not only are they sharpened differently, but their intended tasks, purposes are also very different. So for example, yanagiba is a knife used for slicing raw boneless protein. So normally like sushi, sashimi, stuff like that. You can use it for like crudos and steaks if you want, but they'll steer a lot when you want to account for that kind of stuff. And they also are much more fragile or brittle. Deba, I didn't bring one with me, but it's a thicker kind of triangular looking knife. That one's for fish butchery, so breaking down fish. But it doesn't mean that you'd be like hacking off heads with it. There's still technique that's involved to make sure you don't cause chipping issues, that kind of stuff. And usuba is a vegetable knife, but not a general purpose vegetable knife. Not something you want to go chop like rutabagas and parsnips and carrots with. It's used predominantly for katsuramuki, which is a rotary peeling technique. So if you ever see anyone take the daikon and peel sheets off of that stuff, that is a technique called katsuramuki. Sengiri is like a Japanese equivalent of julienne, and mukimono, various kinds of like garnish design work. So those are much more specialized knives. I found, having worked in Japan for a little bit, the usuba was by far the knife that I used the most when I was cooking there. I tried to come back here and use that. It does not work in Western kitchens. Like, it is the worst of the knives that one could use in a Western kitchen. Pacing here is different. Cutting boards here are different. The way that we deal with ingredients is different. That being said, Deba was by far the most used knife that I had coming back from Japan because I don't think it matters where you are. Breaking down fish is breaking down fish. You're going to find a method that works well for you and do that well. And once I started to get good with the Deba, I did that. It worked well for me. You can do similar good technique with a flexible fillet knife, however you want to go about it. It's just about understanding what you got in front of you and mastering that. And Yanagiba also did have some space in Western restaurants. If I had like a crudo station going on, or I was working on a meat station where it wasn't like a heavy crust kind of meat, I could get away with that kind of stuff. But today, like I said, we're going to focus on double bevel sharpening. The basic types of double bevel knives, as I mentioned, will be a gyuto, like this kind of thing, a chef's knife. Tsujihiki, which is a long, kind of more narrow slicing knife. Petty knives, which are small kind of utility knives. In Japan, you don't see paring knives as much. People use a petty knife a little bit larger, where you can do all the same kind of like in-hand work. So you can still like peel an apple, peel a carrot, segment citrus, but it's large enough that you can use it for like trimming silver skin, cutting a sandwich in half. So a wider variety of tasks. And as you start to think about what knives you're using, keep that in mind. It's really easy to go down the rabbit hole of buying a lot of stuff because it's cool, because it's fun, because you want it. Be pragmatic with the purchases and be pragmatic with the setup you bring to work. You don't need a ton of stuff. You need really basic, simple stuff that does a lot of things well. So generally speaking, you want like a big knife and a small knife. And you want them to be as versatile as possible. So your big knife should be large enough that you can work with large size ingredients and large quantities of ingredients without having to struggle or, like saw at things a little bit more. And the small knife should be small enough that you can do in-hand stuff, but you're not missing out on only doing in-hand stuff, not being able to do like trimming silver skin or, those kinds of tasks. So, basic overview on knives. When should you sharpen? Like when's a good time to start sharpening? When the knife is not working the way you want. When you start cutting stuff and you're like, this is whack, I am not happy with it, that's probably a good time to sharpen. There's no prescribed time where it's like the perfect time to sharpen, and there's going to be a lot of personal preference involved in that. People have different expectations of what's sharp or not sharp. If your chef is telling you need to sharpen your knife, definitely that is the time you need to sharpen your stuff. But chances are, and hopefully, you will come to that conclusion on your own before that time. Try and be mindful. Try and be introspective as you cut stuff. Is my knife cutting well? Does it skid over the skin of stuff? Are my results getting like bruised or smashed? Am I seeing like when I cut herbs a ton of chlorophyll loss from that kind of stuff? Those are generally indicators that your knife isn't as sharp as you want it to be. So whenever it's not working the way you want, that is the time to sharpen it. In a perfect world, you can do this much more consistently than that. So as an example, clearly I'm a dorky knife person. I was equally dorky when I was cooking professionally, and I built out a system for myself to maintain a consistent level of high performance with my knives. And this was my process. At the end of every day, I would sharpen my knives. I didn't spend a lot of time because I did it every single day, but at the end of every day, I would sharpen my knives. When I came in the morning, usually after going to the fish market, it was like 9 in the morning, I would start doing my prep. I would prep out until about 10:30 before lunch service starts, and I had a third pan with a finishing stone on my station. And I would use a stropping motion, and I would touch up my knife really quick. I would go eat family meal real quick, then I would go through lunch service. Then I would touch up my knife again, and then I would prep out a little bit, take a break, come back, prep out a little bit before dinner, touch up my knife, eat family meal real quick, work through service, and at the end of the day, I would sharpen my knife. And the reason that I did it that way, I stopped using honing rods. Honing rods start to cause a lot of damage to my knife. This kept a consistent level of performance all the way through the day and from day to day. So I knew every time I grabbed my knife and I started cutting stuff with it, it was going to work the same way. So I didn't have to worry about adjusting to that. I could just focus on making sure like my actual technique for cutting was good, or consistency in size and shape was good, and not like struggling with my knife performance. You'll find some kind of system that works well for you, but try and think about that. In any kind of, especially fine dining, but any kind of restaurant, the thing that we're targeting the most is consistency. And that's consistency in terms of like your habits through work. That's consistency from dish to dish, seasoning, movements. As consistent as you can be with that kind of stuff, that's the stuff that's going to make your life easier. And that's the difference between like running all over the place or moving your feet as little as possible where you're in service. Same thing goes with the knives. So that's that. All right. Before we begin sharpening, the first thing that we want to do is we want to inspect our knife. And we want to inspect our knife in a wide variety of ways to figure out what kind of sharpening we need to do, what kind of problems we're going to run into along the way, and if there are any other things that came up along the way we weren't sure. This is how we're going to do that. We're just going to take a cursory look at the knife. We're going to look at the knife. Are there chips or damage in the edge that we can see on either side? Is the bevel consistent and even all the way through? Are there curves, scratches? Is the profile of the knife wonky? Do I have like a bird's beak tip? You know, what do I see just at first glance when I look at it, right? I'm going to look at both sides when I do that. Then I'm going to start to look at blade straightness. If your blade is bent and you start sharpening, you're going to exacerbate the problems of that bend. So you want to make sure that if your blade is bent, you fix that prior to sharpening. You may not be capable of fixing that kind of stuff now, but at least you can be aware of when that problem occurs so you can find someone that can help you out with that. Anytime that you sharpen a knife that's already bent, you're going to make the things a lot worse. So how do we look for straightness? We're going to line the knife up with one eye, and then we're going to just sight down the spine. And I can slowly lift the tip up so that I can start to see moving my focus all the way along the blade as I go up towards the tip. And I can look, is it straight? And I can use things in the background that are straight as well as reference points. So like, for example, there's that line there on the wall. I can kind of line up with that and look at that as I'm going up. I want to do the same thing with the edge here, tilting up and following my focus all the way through. I want to do that again, pointing the edge towards my face and look from it in this direction and in this direction. Sometimes you'll see that it looks fine here, but when you look this way, you can see something else. So you want to look at it from a wide variety of angles when you can. You want to look at it this way, and you want to see, is the spine and edge in alignment? Does the edge come above or below the spine in some areas? So not only can we have issues with bending to the right or left, we can also have warping issues all the way through the blade. We want to be aware of those kinds of things. So we're going to look like this and like this. We're going to flip it over and look like this and like this. And lastly, we want to gauge how thick or thin our knives are behind the edge. If there is one factor that matters more than anything else in terms of knife performance, it is cross-sectional geometry. Cross-sectional geometry is how thick the spine is, or how thick the knife is at the spine, and how it tapers from spine to edge all the way down. So the taper from here to here, right? Because when you cut stuff, you are displacing material. The further that you have to move that material, and the shorter period of time over which that displacement occurs, the more force is required to cut stuff. So knives that are thin and stay thin longer will move through foods much more easily, but they are a little bit more fragile or brittle. You want to know where you stand on that. Do I need to do something about that? Do I need to thin my knife out? Or can I just sharpen regularly? What kind of performance can I expect? What kind of durability can I expect? And so when we look at that, we're going to look at the choil of the knife. That's this area here. And we're going to see how it tapers as it goes from here towards the edge. Does it get thick at the edge? Where does it get thick? So you're going to look at it that way. And you can also pinch the blade and run your fingers along the edge this way, over it. And you can feel. Does it feel thick? If so, where does it feel thick? What's going on with it? So that's the way that you want to look at your knife before you start even thinking about sharpening. You want to know what you're getting yourself into. Identify any problems you think you need to address through the course of your sharpening. Everyone with me on this so far? Any questions about anything thus far? All right, cool. So we're going to check for straightness, problems with chips, scratches, broken tips, handle installation, all kinds of stuff like that. If there are straightness issues, we fix those usually with something like this. And so what we'll do is we'll identify where the apex of the bend is. Like if the bend is here and it begins here and here, I'm going to identify where it begins, where it ends, and where the apex, the strongest point of that curve is. And I'm going to take this and I'm going to bend in the opposite direction, starting where the bend begins, working with stronger pressure towards the apex, peaking at the apex, and working with decreasing pressure away from it towards the end of the bend. And I'll do that slowly, trying to slowly work out that bend. So there are a lot of ways to do that kind of stuff. Definitely, I would leave that to people that are more experienced. But if it's something that you want to learn about, it's possible to do. It just takes practice and knowledge. You might snap a blade or two along the way. It happens. Cool. So, when you sharpen, you're going to need something to sharpen with. And in a complete sharpening setup, there are 5 things that you want to have. Some of those things are absolutely necessary. Some of those things are kind of nice to have. The 5 things are a coarse stone, a medium grit stone, and a finishing stone. Something to hold them in place, and something to keep them flat. All right? Holding it in place, 100% necessary. Doesn't matter who you are, you need some shit to hold your stone in place. The purpose of the stone holding in place is to stop it from sliding all over the place where you're sharpening, but also to position you in an area where you have knuckle clearance, so you're not scraping along the countertop, or provide height, so you can sharpen wherever you want. That can be as simple as a damp towel on the corner of your countertop. So like if I wanted to sharpen, I could put a damp towel here and put my stone on top of it, and I'm sharpening here with my knuckles overhanging nothing, so I don't have knuckle clearance issues. Or it can be like some fancy ass thing like this, or anything in between. As long as it stops your stone from sliding all over the place and positions you in an area where it's comfortable to sharpen. My stone here is held at a slight decline. That's not necessary. It's just comfortable and convenient. So, holding it in place, necessary. Keeping it flat, 100% necessary. Did I leave that thing out here? Steven, do you have the stone fixer from one of the bins over there. Maybe it's right over there. The diamond stone fixer. There are a lot of ways to keep your stones flat. I tend to use the diamond stone fixer. It's an aluminum plate with diamonds embedded on one side. You can leave it in there. It's fine. This is the diamond stone fixer I normally use. So it's a big metal plate, and it's got diamonds on one side, really coarse ones. You can also use a coarse stone, all kinds of different stone fixers. Doesn't matter. As you sharpen your knife, the stone is going to wear. And because you're not a robot, it's going to wear unevenly. It's not going to be a perfect wear pattern. Usually it's this kind of like oval shape right in the center of the thing. And it's going to start to look like a half pipe. Angle consistency is paramount. It's very important when we're sharpening. And it's very difficult to maintain a consistent angle on some shit that looks like a half pipe. So periodically, when you notice that your stone doesn't feel flat or look flat, you're going to rub something on the surface to wear down the high spots and make it flat again. When it's flat, it's very easy to maintain a consistent angle on it. When it's not flat, you're going to start making mistakes and mess things up. Again, absolutely necessary, but it can range from free to stupidly expensive or anything in between. So you can use like the sidewalk outside, a nice flat section of the sidewalk. You dump some water on it, rub the stone in it. You can use wet dry sandpaper from the automotive store, lay it out on a flat surface with the grit facing up, or like a diamond flattening plate is kind of the bougie way to go about it. But it works really fast and it's very convenient. They just cost more money. So holding it in place, keeping it flat, necessary. Of the three stones, the only one that is absolutely necessary is a medium grit stone. Medium grit stones will range anywhere from 800 grit to 2000 grit. Like sandpaper, the higher the number is, the finer the grit is. The lower the number is, the coarser it is. So anything in that 800 to 2000 grit range is a medium grit stone. Medium grit stones are important because they will do your daily sharpening. They will take you from dull to sharp and leave you with an edge that's more than adequate for anything you need to do in a kitchen. You'll be able to get rid of minor chips and nicks. And so if you had just one thing, that's the way to start. The second stone that I'd recommend getting is a finishing stone. Finishing stones will be anything from 3,000 grit or up, but for kitchen knives, there's a range that makes sense, and it's about 3,000 to 8,000 grit. Stones can be much higher than that. They have like 60,000 grit stones. As you go up in grit, you start to lose edge bite. So when you cut things, especially in professional kitchens, you need tactile feedback from that cut, and you want an edge that works well for a wide variety of things. So when you cut like a bell pepper, and you have a stupidly smooth edge, it skids over that skin. Same for like eggplant. So you want to have something that digs in a little bit better. So we're always trying to find a range that has enough bite to do the task we want to do. There's personal preference involved in that as well. Some people prefer toothier edges. Some people prefer more smooth edges. You figure out what works well for you, but just don't go too extreme. Like no 15,000 grit stones. 3 to 8, happy, safe range. 3 will be a little bit toothier. 8 will be a little bit finer. When we sharpen for customers, we normally finish around 6,000 grit. That's what I brought with me today, so that's what you guys will see today. The benefit of the finishing stone is that you get more refinement out of your edge. So the cuts are smoother, there's less damage to the foods you're cutting. Things look shinier, I guess, if that matters to you. But the biggest thing that it provides a benefit with is that it makes the process of burr removal much easier. When we are sharpening, our goal is to form a burr on one side and then on the other side. Metal has really strong covalent bonds. It likes to stay connected to itself. And so when we sharpen, some of the metal gets ground away, but a little bit flips up and over to the opposite side that we're sharpening on. Kind of like a piece of aluminum foil right at your edge. And this little thing is called a burr, all right? When we sharpen, we're going to form a burr, then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, form a burr, and then through the course of our sharpening, we're going to try and make that burr smaller, and eventually we're going to weaken its connection to the edge and remove it entirely. Finishing stones make that removal part much easier because they're not as aggressive, so you're not as likely to form a new burr, and it's possible to remove that burr cleanly and effectively with finishing stones. So that's the biggest benefit that they provide. You can do it on a medium grit stone, just trickier. It takes a little bit more time and practice. Coarse stones are the last thing that I would recommend someone get started with, which is ironic because it will by far and away be the most useful of the things that you can get. Coarse stones are there for major repairs, big chips, nicks, when your knife is super fucking dull and you need to get it sharp, but also as you get better at sharpening, just getting through the process much faster. You're not trying to sit there and spend 30 minutes on sharpening. Like I spend more than 5 minutes on a knife, I'm gonna be pissed off, right? We got shit to do, we have all kind of like, literally, the kitchen life is this. You have like this much shit to do in this much time. So we're not trying to spend like 30 minutes on sharpening. We're trying to spend like 5 minutes on sharpening, 10 minutes on sharpening, not much more than that. Coarse stones will help speed up that process and help you deal with kind of more serious damage. We talked earlier about cross-sectional geometry. Periodically, we're going to make our knives thinner. It's called thinning behind the edge. We'll go over that a little bit later today. Coarse stones make that possible. If you try and do that on a medium grit stone, you're going to spend like hours and days doing that stuff. Coarse stones will make that much faster. The downside of coarse stones is that every mistake that you make will show up much more quickly and in a much more severe manner. So if you don't feel comfortable with your sharpening, you don't understand what's going on, you're not really 100% with it, every fuck up is going to be a much more serious fuck up on a coarse stone than it is on a medium grit stone or a finishing stone. So I recommend when people get started, start with a medium grit stone. It's going to take you a little bit longer, but you can see your mistakes as they're happening, and you can do something about them before they become serious issues. And when you're comfortable with sharpening, get a coarse stone. You will never regret having one because it makes everything much faster. So, to recap, coarse, medium, fine. Coarse would be anything under 800, usually around like 400 grit. Coarse, medium, fine, something to hold it in place and something to keep it flat. All good? Cool. All right. There are a lot of different stones out there, really expensive ones, really cheap ones. Don't worry about it. Buy anything decent. The rest of it is just convenience relative to budget. More expensive things don't necessarily equate to better results. Like 6,000 grit will always be 6,000 grit, but some might cut faster or leave a nicer finish or feel better in use. That's not a functional thing. That's a preference thing. So, don't feel like you got to run out and spend a buttload of money on stuff. Simple tools, good technique, a lot of practice. That trumps everything else. There are 3 main kinds of stones that you will see. And it's important to know what you have because it will dictate the kind of care and maintenance and prep that they require. There are ceramic stones, vitrified and sintered stones, resinoid-based stones, and magnesia-based stones. Ceramic stones are the bulk of the things you'll see on the market. They're the kind of stones that prior to use, you have to stick in water, usually for about 10 minutes, but it's really until they're fully saturated. So you'll see bubbles coming out of the stone. When the bubbles stop, the stone is ready to use. Ceramic stones can be left in water permanently if you want to. Just change the water out so you don't have like mold or algae growth in there. Try and be, not disgusting. You can soak them, dry them. I've stuck them in a dehydrator to dry them out before when I needed to. They're very durable. Ceramic stones are nice because the binding agent, the ceramic, is also really hard. And it acts like an abrasive in conjunction with the abrasiveness in the stone. So ceramic stones, or synthetic stones in general, are made of some kind of abrasive and some kind of binding agent mixed together, like making bread with raisins in it, maybe, right? You mix them together, you knead them up until it's homogeneous, you form them into some kind of shape, and you bake them. And that's how they are. So the ceramic is really hard, and that acts as an aggressive abrasive as well. They provide really good tactile feedback. They feel grippy and responsive, but sometimes it can be a little bit harsh. So those are ceramic stones. Magnesia-based stones are a polar opposite. Like these are magnesia-based stones. They require no soaking at all. Just splash water on them, you're good to go. When you're done, you wipe them clean, wipe them dry. They're very, very convenient. If you soak them, they will start to fall apart. They can develop spiderweb cracking. The binding agent will leach out into the water and they lose structural stability. But in terms of convenience, they work really well. Magnesia-based stones tend to be on the harder side of stuff. They often feel a little bit more glassy or slippery. So if you're looking for really responsive tactile feedback, that's not always the best place to go. But if you value convenience, you don't want to soak stuff, you don't have time to soak stuff, magnesia-based stones work really well for that kind of thing. The last kind of stone is a resinoid-based stone. Resinoid-based stones are often sold as flash and go stones, but it's not exactly the way that they work. They're a little bit more porous than magnesia-based stones, and so as you start sharpening on them in the beginning, you notice they soak in a little bit of water. You can use them as flash and go stones, but they'll feel a little bit chalky and dry in the beginning. I permanently soak them. I leave them in water. And what happens when you permanently soak resinoid-based stones is the binding agent absorbs all that water, and as it absorbs it, it softens and it swells. And as it softens, it means that it's easier to grind that stuff away. So as I'm working on the stone, the binding agent wears away a little bit more quickly, and it releases more fresh abrasive much faster. So they tend to cut faster. The binding agent also has a burnishing effect on metals, so you get like a much smoother looking, more brightly polished finish from resinoid-based stones. They tend to have a creamy, kind of like a luxurious creamy feel when you sharpen on them, whereas ceramic stones feel like track tires on a car, and magnesia stuff is just very glass-like. The resinoid-based stone is like driving a Bentley, like it's smooth and creamy. However, if you choose to permanently soak them, you cannot take them out of water and dry them easily. The outside will evaporate more quickly than the inside, and it will contract as it loses that water mass, and it will start to form stress fractures through the stone, and it will start to crack and fall apart. So if you want to permanently soak a resinoid-based stone, you just leave that shit in water. All right. If you do want to dry it out, you'll wrap it in a damp towel and kind of slow down the drying process and let it come to more of an equilibrium over a long period of time. But the best thing is, if you can, leave it in water. My experience is that they work better when they're permanently soaked. Your mileage may vary. I've been doing it for a long time. That is the way that I do stuff. So those are the 3 main kinds of stones. So knowing what kind of stone you have then will dictate, do I need to soak it before I start sharpening? Can I just get going with it? What kind of care and maintenance does it require? And also, what kind of tactile feedback am I likely to experience? So when you're shopping for stones, I have a preference for this kind of thing. I'm going to buy this kind of stone. I like that kind of thing. I'm going to buy that kind of stone. So understanding that kind of stuff is helpful in that regard. We went over stone fixtures a little bit. As I mentioned, there's a number of ways to go about it. I like the diamond flattening plate. There's big ceramic stone fixtures with grooves cut in them. It doesn't really matter what it is. Some will work faster, some will last longer. As long as you keep your stone flat, that's what's most important. You don't have to flatten it every single time you sharpen. You just have to flatten it when it starts to look or feel not flat. And the easiest way to do that is take a pencil and draw a grid pattern on the surface of your stone. And then you take your stone fixer and you rub it on there, or if you take your stone and rub it on the stone fixer, it doesn't really matter, either way. And as you do that, you'll see that the high spots get worn down much more quickly, and the pencil will disappear in those areas, and the low spots will still have the pencil in there. You just continue doing this kind of stuff until it's gone. And so as you do it, what you're going to do is you're going to take it and rub it like this on the stone surface, and periodically you're going to turn the stone around and then keep rubbing it. The reason we rotate the stone periodically is because we, as humans, have a tendency to not press down equally in all ways. So sometimes we'll lean a little bit more this way or lean a little bit more this way, and over time the stones will start to look more like trapezoidal shaped instead of nice rectangular shaped things. So rotating it periodically will help you mitigate that a little bit. Do that until you see all the pencil is gone, and you can get used to looking also at the stone surface. You'll see dark spots remain. Those are low spots. You just keep going until that's gone. When you're done, you're going to grind the edges of the stone down at like a 45-degree angle. There are a couple of reasons that you do this. One is that when they're really sharp 90-degree angles, that shit hurts when your hand bumps into it. Two is the stone corners will tend to chip much more when it's a 90-degree angle. So by chamfering it, grinding it down at that 45-degree angle, we can minimize the kind of chipping we see around the edges of our stones and hurt ourselves less when we run into the edge of our stone. So that is stone fixing. You don't want to overdo it, right? You don't want to spend so much time flattening all the time because then you're wasting material of your stone. The shit is not cheap. You got to buy them periodically. So you want to try and maximize the life of your stone. So if you can, when you're sharpening, try and pay attention to where the high and low spots are and work a little bit more in the high spots when you can and a little bit less in the low spots when you can to try and even that out a little bit through the course of your sharpening. But don't be fooled. That will not mean that you don't have to flatten. It just means that you can extend the time periods between flattening. You will always have to flatten. All right. Honing steels. Who here uses honing steels? Ceramic ones, metal ones? Cool. Honing steels are not always great for every kind of knife. In general, Japanese knives are a lot thinner and harder than Western counterparts. When you exert pressure against any material, you'll see those materials go through various stages. Initially, you'll see elastic deformation. That's where something will bend and pop back into place. When you cross any materials threshold for that, you'll get into plastic deformation. That's bending and staying bent. And when you cross the materials threshold for that, you'll see fracturing or damage, chipping, right? The thinner and harder things are, the more narrow that range is for elastic and plastic deformation, especially at the edge of the knife. So when you have knives that are extremely thin and or extremely hard, like Japanese knives, you want to minimize things that have those kinds of problems. When you use a honing rod, the rod is round, the edge is straight, they come together in one small point of contact, a tangent, right? When you have the line that just touches the outside of the circle. All of the force that you apply is now concentrated in a really small surface area, and you're doing that right at the edge of your knife. It's very easy to move past that point of elastic and plastic deformation into fracturing, and so you might see a lot of like microchipping along the edge of those knives. On softer knives, like German knives or softer Japanese knives, you can get away with it. It's not bad, but you want to make sure that you use appropriate technique with it. So instead of doing this shit up in the air like this where you do it, the best thing you can do is take a towel, put the tip down, and do it like this. And the reason that works better is you get much more pressure control when you have one moving piece instead of two, and it's much easier to see the angle you're sharpening at. I avoided honing rods entirely. And the reason I did is because honing rods rely on bending things back and forth into place to realign edges that have come out of alignment. But bending things causes steel fatigue, not so dissimilar from paper clips when you bend them back and forth a bunch. Eventually, it just doesn't want to hold up anymore. So common experience of anyone that's ever used a honing rod is this. You sharpen your knife, it's really fucking sharp, you go and cut some stuff. Then you go to your honing rod, and you go back to cutting. And each time you use your honing rod, you notice the time between when you need to use your honing rod becomes shorter and shorter and shorter until you're doing that shit every 2 seconds. The reason that happens is this work fatigue, steel fatigue that occurs. My way of mitigating that was to use a finishing stone. So I've kept a finishing stone, usually around 6,000 grit, in a third pan near my station. And periodically when I need to touch up, instead of spending 5 seconds doing this, I would spend maybe 20 seconds doing a stropping motion. And stropping motions are like what you see barbers do with the straight razors, leather. It's edge trailing strokes covering the full length of the blade. So for example, edge trailing means that the edge is the back of that motion. Edge leading means the edge is the front of that motion. And I use this terminology because it's more helpful than push or pull. Push or pull will depend on how you're holding the knife. But edge trailing and edge leading is consistent no matter what you're doing. So edge trailing strokes in a stropping motion will look something like this, covering one side on one time and then switching over to the other side, covering the entire length of the blade, right? And I can do this in lieu of using a honing rod, and maybe it takes me 15, 20 seconds instead of 5, 10 seconds, but the time period between needing to do that will be much longer. It's It's much better for my blade. The surface area contact is much wider, and it's a little bit more abrasive in a way that we're looking for without being like too coarse or aggressive. So that was my way of doing things. Your mileage may vary, and you got to figure out what kind of kitchen environment you're in. How your chef wants things to be run, whether he's okay with you having a finishing stone in your station or not. You got to manage those things yourself. So figure out what's going on, but think about how you're going about things and what kind of results you want, and try and enact a game plan that will allow you to do that more effectively. Does that make sense? Yeah. Cool. So with Japanese knives being thinner and harder, you also have to figure out what kind of person am I when I cut. Am I a finesse-oriented person that's very like careful and meticulous with things, or am I a more get shit done kind of person? It's not that one way is right and the other way is wrong. You just have to know yourself. What kind of way are you? You know, I've worked with a ton of dudes that are like much more get shit done. They're way faster at stuff than me, but I was a very finesse-oriented, careful kind of person. Because I was that way, I was able to use knives that are a lot thinner and harder. If you are a more finesse-oriented person, you can get away with knives that are thinner and harder. Thinner knives will move through food more easily, especially tall, dense foods, butternut squash, rutabagas, carrots. Less wedging, less knife getting stuck, less foods cracking at the bottom, but they can be damaged or chipped much more easily. Harder knives will stay sharp for a much longer period of time, but they can be damaged or chipped much more easily. So you got to understand that balance, and again, the way that you cut. If you're a more get shit done kind of person, nothing wrong with that. Just find knives that are a little bit softer and maybe a little bit thicker, and they will hold up better to that. But they won't stay sharp quite as long, and they'll wedge more in tall, dense foods. So understanding those differences will help you figure out what works best for you. You guys with me on all this stuff so far? Yeah. Perfect. So what causes damage to thin, hard knives? Cutting really hard things. Bones, frozen foods, seeds, nuts. Cutting things with excessive force, like hard board contact. For me, it was always julienning onions. You get into like a rhythm and you're like, just do it like a little bit softer. So no bones, no frozen foods, no seeds, nuts. And minimize or eliminate lateral force exerted across the edge. Pressure coming from the side here. So that's twisting, rotating, side-to-side movements. But even rocking motions where the tip stays in contact with the board as you move laterally across stuff, that exerts a lot of lateral force across the edge. If you can minimize that, it will be better for your knife. It will be better for the edge retention you get. So instead of using rocking motions, you can use kind of a thrust cutting motion like this where the blade is coming entirely off the board as you come down and cut stuff. And instead of doing this kind of stuff for herbs, roll your parsley or basil up, shift knot it, rotate the bunch 90 degrees, shift knot again. You'll have much less bruising, much less damage, and also more consistent sized cuts at the end of what you're doing. So again, in fine dining restaurants, consistency matters. That's what you want to pay attention to. So that's that. Now let's start doing some sharpening. The first place we're going to start with sharpening is body positioning. Body positioning for sharpening is going to be very difficult. I'm going to come over here for a second so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So when you walk up to your stone, instead of just walking up to it like this, we're going to take a step back with one of our feet. Anyone left-handed here? Perfect. Are you the kind of person that translates stuff well in your mind from right to left? Do you want to see everything left-handed as well?
No, I can flip it.
If there's a time you want to see something left-handed, let me know. I'll do it. I'm just going to be slower and less good at it that way. Instead of standing like this, we're going to take a step back with our right foot. It's going to shift our body to the side a little bit. Same thing you want to do for cutting, by the way. So instead of walking up to your cutting board and standing like this, stand like this. It will shift your work area from the center of your board to the lower right-hand corner of your board. Now, when you cut stuff, your knuckles overhang the floor instead of the cutting board, so you don't have knuckle clearance issues as you do stuff. I'm going to walk back there. So you guys saw how my feet were, right? So body positioning is going to look like that. My feet are like this. I'm off to the side. So when I cut, instead of here, I'm here. My knuckles overhang the floor. I don't have knuckle clearance issues. My arm has much better range of motion. It's easier for me to look down on where I'm cutting and gauge cut thickness without being off balance. Here I'm off balance. Here I'm not. Sharpening, you want that same body positioning. And the reason is our motion in sharpening is going to be straight forward and straight back. So we want that range of motion with our arms. So again, for you, it's going to look like this. Same deal. All right? Cool. So that is our body positioning for sharpening. Kind of like a fighting stance. All right? Now we're going to start with our grips. We're going to start sharpening usually the first side of the knife, which would be the right side of the knife. So I'm holding the knife like this. I'm going to start sharpening this side. Our grip is going to start from a pinch grip. And I hate to do this, but I'm going to go over a pinch grip with y'all because I see cooks, professional home cooks, whatever, always fuck up the pinch grip. They're like way down here. I don't even know what people are doing. Pinch grip is going to look something like this. You're going to take the pad of your thumb and the left side of the first knuckle of your index finger. You're going to pinch those things together like this, right? And then you can do that shit way up here on the blade. Way, way, way up here, all right? Your middle finger is going to wrap right here under the neck of the knife, right against the choil of the knife. This is where your middle finger lives. Your index finger and thumb fit here, and your last two fingers wrap really lightly around the handle. You shouldn't have like a Kung Fu death grip on your knife. In fact, you want to keep your grip loose and relaxed as much as possible. So if you notice like you got white knuckles and your hands are really tired after cutting some stuff all the time, chances are your grip is a little bit too tight and you want to relax that a little bit. And I think you'll find that the more relaxed you are, the easier it is to cut stuff. If you find that you have a Kung Fu death grip on your knife and you struggle with that kind of thing, stick your pinky out. It sounds really ridiculous and douchey, but it will force your grip to relax. And so it can help you develop good habits in terms of how loose your grip can be. And when you get comfortable with that looser grip, then you don't have to do that kind of stuff. But this is where we're going to start, pinch grip. Sharpening the first side of the knife, we're going to take our index finger and move it up to the spine. And we're going to take our thumb, we're going to move it down towards the heel like this. All right? I'm going to flip this over for a medium grit stone. So normally we would go through the whole progression, coarse, medium, fine. For the sake of time today, we're going to do medium and fine, but same deal. So, I got my stone wet. My stone is in the stone holder. I got my pinch grip. I move my index finger up to the spine, my thumb down towards the heel. My body positioning is here where I want it to be. All right, now we're going to start sharpening. I'm going to put the knife down on the stone at a roughly 45-degree angle of approach. And when I say angle of approach, I mean the angle this way here, not the angle of sharpening, this angle here. All right, so we're going to call this angle of sharpening, and we're going to call this angle of approach. Cool? The angle of approach is roughly 45 degrees. It could be a little bit less, a little bit more, but the goal is this. We want a nice, comfortable place for our wrist here, so we're not trying to hold it like this or like this. Nice and comfortable. We want the increased surface area contact from holding it at an angle. So if I hold it like this, I have less surface area contact with the stone than if I hold it like this, where I have more surface area contact with the stone. And as I mentioned to you before, our motion of sharpening is going to be straight forward, straight backward. If I have an offset in terms of the way the knife wobbles relative to my vector of motion, moving forward and backward, I can maintain a more consistent angle that way a little bit more easily. Everyone understand so far? Yeah. Cool. All right, so I got my grip, I got my angle of approach. Now I got to figure out my angle of sharpening. For most Japanese knives, the safe bet range for angles is somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees per side. All right. If you're not sure what that looks like, you can eyeball it. 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 22.5 degrees, 11.125. Pretty easy to eyeball. However, if you want, and you have a smartphone, you just use an app for that shit. On the iPhone, for example, there's an app called Measure. And if you click on the bottom, you'll see there's this level over here. You can take this level, you can put it down on something, tap the screen and zero it out, and then you can see what does it look like, right? That way you can get a better idea of where you want to be. It's not that there's one particular angle that makes the most sense. It's rather that you need to understand what those angles mean. So, for example, the more acute that you go, the lower that number is, the sharper your knife will feel, but the more fragile or brittle it will be. The less acute you go, the more tough and durable it will be, but the less sharp it will feel. All right, German knives will be a little bit higher, usually in like the 18 plus or minus a few degrees kind of range of things. So keep that in mind. You don't have to worry about specifically being at some angle because it's some special knife. Use your knife. See how it works. Think about how you want it to work and enact a game plan that will do that effectively for you. So if you want something to cut a little bit sharper with a sharper feel, go a little bit more acute. If you chip the shit out of your knife, go a little bit less acute. Figure out what works well for you, the cutting boards you're using, so on and so forth. So we have our angle of approach. We have our angle of sharpening. Here we go. So now I'm going to take 2 to 3 fingers and I'm going to put them as close to the edge as possible without touching the stone. If I can feel the stone under my fingers are going to start bleeding. And it's not that you cut yourself. It's literally you just grind the fingertips away on the stone. Don't do that. So if you feel the stone, move your fingers up a little bit. All right? I use the heel of my knife and the edge of the stone as reference points. So I know, for example, if I start 1 centimeter in or half an inch in, I'm going to move forward. I'm still half an inch in. I'm going to move back. I'm still half an inch in. So I have my fingers near the edge. My motion is straight forward, straight back. Straight forward, straight back. All right? And as I do that, I can either slowly crawl my fingers down the blade as I go, or I can stop, move my fingers, and continue. Stop, move my fingers, and continue. Wherever you apply pressure with your fingers, that's where the bulk of sharpening is taking place. You want to make sure that you're touching all the way along the blade as you go. So I'm going to do this on the first side of the knife, working up the knife until I get towards the tip. For tip adjustments, you always need to make, on either side of the knife, it's going to involve lifting up a little bit and rotating back towards the spine a little bit, okay? So, like this. So, as you look at the first of the images that you have over there, image number 1 will show a few different things. The first image in the upper left-hand side of it shows kind of your edge when it's dull. You can see the edge is rounded over there, right? When we're sharpening here, what we're looking to do is the second part of that image. You'll see that there's a burr formed on one side. We want to sharpen until we form a burr that's even and consistent. That's that little floppy piece of metal that you see in the upper right-hand side there. Until it's even and consistent from one side all the way through from the heel to the tip. Then we're going to flip the knife over, and you'll see in the lower left-hand corner of that page, the burr is now on the opposite side, right? We'll do that progression on our coarse stone, and then our medium grit stone, and then our finishing stone. The coarse stone is we're going to do the bulk of that work, or whatever your first stone is, the bulk of that work. And then each subsequent stone after that is about refining the scratch pattern and making that burr just a little bit smaller. And the very last thing we do will be weakening that burr's connection to the edge and removing it so we have a nice, clean, stable, sharp edge like you see in that bottom corner there. So that's the progression that we'll be going through there. If we look at the second image there, can you show me what the second image? I just want to make sure I have them in the right order. Perfect. Lovely. So this is a function of cross-sectional geometry. Imagine that the knife is sticking through the page like this. Like if this is the page, sticking through like this. You're looking at a cross-section of the knife. The black outline might show the knife when it's brand new. And the red lines there will show as you sharpen the knife over time. You start to move into thicker and thicker sections of the blade. So as you get into the deeper part of the blade, the knife becomes thicker and thicker behind the edge. The distance from one side to the other increases, right? So as you sharpen, your knife will inherently become thicker and thicker behind the edge, and will start to be more tough and durable, but it'll also wedge more in foods. And you'll notice it more in tall, dense foods like sweet potatoes, butternut squash, and stuff like that. Periodically, what we're going to do is called thinning behind the edge. And thinning behind the edge looks like the green lines on that page. And you can see that the angle is much more acute there. So if the red lines are that 10 to 15 degrees, that green line is much lower, maybe like, 2 to 4 degrees, 2 to 5 degrees. And in doing so, you're grinding the sides of the knife here and here, recreating a cross-sectional geometry that's a lot thinner and starts to cut well. How much do you do? Depends on you, what you're looking for, how tough and durable you need things to be, how thin you want them to be. But just understand that over time as you sharpen, your knife will become thicker behind the edge, and periodically you'll need to do this process of thinning behind the edge to recreate that thin cross-sectional geometry and maintain the kind of performance you're looking for with your knives. You guys with me on that so far? Yeah. Perfect. Let's go to image number 3. Awesome. What does image number 3 look like? All right, perfect. So, as you're sharpening, in an ideal world, perfect world, you would do a little bit of thinning and a little bit of sharpening every single time you sharpen. So, every single time I would do a little bit of this and a little bit of this. And that way I can maintain a consistent level of performance. Most people don't do that because it's very time consuming and the side of your knife will get scratched up and it doesn't look pretty and everyone wants stuff to look pretty all the time. But ideally, that's what you would do. Realistically, what you're going to do is when your knife no longer works the way you want, you do a bunch of thinning, you'll go back to getting it nice and pretty, and then you continue sharpening and cutting until it gets bad again. You do it again and again. If you have knives that are extremely thin and or extremely hard, so like, does anyone have like crazy thin Japanese knives, like a Takamura or a Ginga or a... Well, even within the world of Japanese knives, there are some that are like thinner and thicker, and there are some that are harder and softer. When you have things that are on the extreme side of things, so extremely thin, like crazy fucking thin or crazy hard, and you notice that the knife chips a little bit more than you want, but you love that cross-section geometry, you love the way it moves through food, you can utilize a technique called a micro bevel. So if you look at the upper image there, you'll see that the very edge of the knife, there's like a tiny little bevel there, right? And you see it's just on one side of the knife. And the idea is that you remove the last little part of the edge, the weakest part of the edge, and make that part a little bit more tough and durable. You sacrifice a little bit of maximum potential sharpness in favor of having a more tough and durable knife and maintaining a thin cross-sectional geometry. You do not want to do this with knives that are softer or thicker or already more tough and durable. This is something you want to do only on knives that are extremely thin or extremely hard to maintain that cross-sectional geometry when you have issues with that on like really hard cutting boards or really difficult tasks. So that's what's going on there. All right, let's switch to image number 4. All right, in this image, you'll see on the upper part is just like a profile view of a knife. And you'll see that there is the red line to the edge. Yeah, perfect. The red line to the edge, that's your primary cutting edge. That's the bevel. And you'll see that it's consistent from A to B, C to D, E to F, all the way through. It's the same height all the way through. And you'll notice along the tip of the knife, I've colored in the spine for that bevel width. The reason I did that is what we talked about earlier. In order to sharpen the tips of your knife, you will have to lift up and rotate back towards the spine of the knife just a little bit to get the bevel width to come in contact with the stone. That is the only way you can maintain a consistent and even bevel width all the way through the knife. All right? So the knife will tell you how to do its own tip adjustment. No matter what, it's going to involve some lifting up and some rotating back, and you will do that until you get the bevel width in contact with the stone at the very tip of the knife. Make sense? Right above that, you'll see like a green, is it blue or green right above that? Blue? Blue, perfect. The blue line to the red line. This is the minimum amount of thinning I would ever do to a knife. If you do less than this, or you're making less contact than this, you're not having a significant enough effect on overall cross-sectional geometry. So usually when I do it, at minimum, it's 1/5 the blade height. Sometimes it'll be half the blade height, or almost the whole blade height. It depends on what I'm looking for in terms of the impact I want on over cross-sectional geometry. The higher up I go, the more significant that impact is overall. The lower I go, the less significant that impact is. But keep in mind that this is the minimum amount you want to do. And you'll notice for thinning, also the area along the spine is colored in, and that's because for thinning, the same adjustment takes place, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine until that contact area, that target contact area, comes in contact with the stone. Make sense? On some knives, they have what's called distal taper, and distal taper is where the knife starts off thick and gets much thinner as it goes towards the tip along the spine. That's called distal taper. And when you have that, what occurs is that when you maintain the same angle sharpening something, the bevel will look much smaller at the thin part and much bigger at the thick part. And I can show you what that looks like with my very shitty art skills here. So bear with me for a second. We're going to draw this out. So say this is the thin part of the knife and this is the thick part of the knife. And I sharpen them at the same angle, right? The thin knife will have a bevel that appears this height, but the thick knife will have a bevel that appears this height. Very different, even though it's the same angle. So on knives with distal taper, if you maintain the same angle all the way through from heel to tip, what you will notice is that the bevel gets smaller as you go towards the tip. But that's not what we're looking for. And if you look at the image above it, you'll see the bevel is even and consistent all the way through from heel to tip. So there is some kind of small dynamic angle adjustment that occurs when you're sharpening knives like this. The tip will be a little bit more acute and the heel will be a little bit less acute. It actually ends up being really cool because it means the heel will be much more adept at rough tasks. Things that require the knife to be much more tough and durable because it's a little bit less acute. And the tip will be much more adept at very finesse-oriented tasks because it will be thinner and also a slightly more acute angle. So if you have knives with distal taper, just understand that that kind of functionality is built into the knife. And as you sharpen, it's not about maintaining one angle consistency all the way through. It's about looking for that result of having an even and consistent bevel from heel to tip. Everyone's with me on that so far? Cool. On the bottom there, you'll see a bunch of different kinds of examples of asymmetrical bevels. Many Japanese knives are asymmetrical, meaning that they're sharpened differently on one side than the other. And when you look at them, you'll see the bevel is big on one side and small on the other. It doesn't mean it's a single bevel knife. The way that people have traditionally expressed this is through ratios, 50-50 being roughly equal, and then 70-30 or 90-10 being more extreme examples of asymmetry. Initially, when I heard this, I was like, oh, cool, it makes sense. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Does it mean that I changed the amount of time I sharpen on either side? Is it the angle? Like, how do I deal with that kind of stuff? The reason that people do asymmetrical bevels in Japan, well, there are a number of them depending on the region. One is that a lot of them predominantly make right-handed knives, and so they just have a little bit stronger bias and dominance with their right hand, and they sharpen accordingly. But in some regions, they're intentionally trying to get the edge to be ever so slightly thinner right there behind the edge for an ever so slightly longer period of time, because shit cuts better that way. And asymmetrical edges will stay thin a little bit longer than symmetrical edges will right at the edge. And so that's why they end up sharpening that way. You don't need to worry about 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, 90-10. You don't have to worry about any of that shit. What you need to do is grab your knife and cut some shit and see what happens. When you cut with your knife, does it steer to one side? Does it steer to the other side? Does it cut straight? Does it wedge in foods? Does it not wedge in foods? What goes on with it? Be introspective. Pay attention to that kind of stuff. The more you understand what's going on, the better you can do at being responsive with your sharpening. So, for example, if you notice that your knife steers in this direction, that means it's exerting more pressure on this side than on this side. Well, I need to create more surface area on this side to exert more pressure in that direction and get the knife to cut straight. And I can do that by adjusting the amount of time that I spend sharpening on either side, the angle that I sharpen on either side, or a combination thereof. And as soon as I start to play around with the angle, I have to remember again that the more acute that I go overall, the sharper the knife will feel, but the more fragile or brittle it will be. The less acute that I go, the more tough and durable it will be, but the less sharp it will feel. So instead of worrying about these ratios, just use your knife, see how things work, try and be introspective, pay attention to what goes on, and enact a game plan in your sharpening that will solve the issues that you're seeing with your knife. If you have knives that are clad, meaning that they have soft outer steel and a hard core steel, you also want to pay attention to where the apex of that edge is, the apex being the point where it comes together. If you spend too much time sharpening on one side, the apex of the edge will shift over, and eventually the edge will become the cladding. You don't want to do that. You want to take advantage of this hard core steel you have, so try and keep the apex somewhat centered on clad knives. So that deals with asymmetry, and that deals with the last things we need to do on that page. Let's go to the next page. This last page shows how to use Sharpie, big ass Sharpie like this. Everyone has a Sharpie with them, right? Except for you, it's your day off, man. All right. Yeah. I use the big Magnum Sharpies because it's much easier that way, but you can use a regular Sharpie. Sharpie is really cool because it will help you get high contrast instant visual feedback when you're sharpening. There are 7 mistakes that you can make in the context of sharpening double bevel knives. 6 of them you can see, and 1 of them you can feel. And why not see them in high contrast? It's much easier that way. So when you're sharpening, make sure your knife is dry. Dry the whole thing off. Take Sharpie, color in not just the edge, but some area behind the edge to get like a good ½ inch of Sharpie all up on the knife there. And then let that shit dry, because Sharpie and water don't mix well. So you see in the first image there, Sharpie extends not just from the bevel, but a little bit above it as well. All right? The mistakes that you can make in sharpening are these: angle too high, angle too low, under rotation of the tip, over rotation of the tip, not lifting up enough at the tip, lifting up too much at the tip, and the one that you can feel is inconsistent or uneven burr formation. All right? So working from the top to the bottom, the first one should show angle too high, and that means that the Sharpie at the very edge of the knife is removed, but the area behind it still stays black. And that means that the spine of your knife is too high relative to the stone. All right? When you see that mistake, what do? You lower the spine a little bit, right? Really straightforward. The long-term effect of making this mistake is that your knife will become much thicker behind the edge much more quickly, and it won't feel quite as sharp because it's not as acute of an angle, right? That's the issue that you see with that. So when you see that, lower the spine a little bit, all right? The next one will show you angle too low, and you'll see in this case the edge stays shiny, but the edge stays black. The area behind it becomes shiny, right? When you do this, your knife is not going to become sharp because you haven't hit the edge at all. And in fact, in many cases, this is what thinning behind the edge looks like. This is like the goal of thinning behind the edge. The net effect of making this mistake is not only will your knife not be sharp, but your knife will become thinner. If that's what you're looking for, great. If it's not, don't make the mistake. When you see this mistake, raise the spine up a little bit. So that means your spine is too low. Raise it up a little bit, okay? When you're doing this and you sharpen a little bit, stop, check your work, see what's going on. Dry it off, color it in, sharpen some more. Dry off and color in so much that you're sick of Sharpie, because getting that kind of feedback will help you improve more than anything else that we can teach you here, all right? The next one there should be under rotation at the tip. And on under rotation at the tip, what you'll see is the bevel gets smaller and smaller as you go towards the tip, right? In this case, that means that when you're sharpening, you're lifting up enough, but you're not rotating towards the spine enough. The net effect of this in the long run is that you're going to develop a bird's beak tip. So you're going to have a tip that looks kind of like this. And it's because you're removing more metal behind the tip than right at the very tip of the knife. When you see this, you want to make sure you rotate just a little bit more towards the spine. Not a huge amount, just a little bit, all right? The one after that should be over rotation towards the tip, or towards the spine rather. And that means that you're going too far towards the spine with that adjustment. And in this case, you'll see the bevel increases in size as you go towards the tip. When you see this, the long-term effect of this is you're going to have a lot more belly at the tip of your knife. It's going to swing up a lot more. So if you're short, that really sucks. You can't lift your elbow up as high when you cut stuff. Try not to make this mistake. When you see this thing, lift up a little bit less next time, all right? So that's angle too high, angle too low, under rotation, over rotation. Then we have not lifting up enough. So that means that you're rotating towards the spine, but you're not lifting up enough to get to the very tip of the knife. When you see this, you'll see that the tip stays black and the area behind it just looks like you've lowered the angle as you go towards the tip. The net effect of this is also a bird's beak tip, kind of like this. It just happens a little bit further back from the tip, so you get like a little wonky wave in the edge of your knife. When you see this mistake, this means you need to lift up your elbow a little bit more when you're sharpening the tip of your knife. Cool? And the last one is lifting up too much, and that means that you've gone up too high this way, all right? And when you do that, the tip just gets ground away. It's actually not really easy to see in the Sharpie, but you're more likely to see light reflecting. Instead of being like a plane this way, as you go towards the tip, this part's going to look like this, and the light will reflect up and over. And if it's really extreme, and you look from the spine, you can even see the tip bent to the side a little bit. All right? When you see this, this means you need to lift up a little bit less. When you make this mistake, obviously the tip of your knife is going to be gone. It's very similar to what happens when you break the tip off of your knife. When you have these issues, the way to repair this is not by sharpening from the edge of your knife in, but rather grab a coarse stone or a sidewalk or sandpaper and grind from the spine back down, reshaping the tip. This way you don't mess with the cross-sectional geometry of your knife at all. It doesn't become thicker behind the edge profile stays the same way, you just make it pointy again, all right? So grind this way. So broken tips, lifting up too much, that's the way you deal with it. When you've sharpened perfectly, when you've done everything the way you're supposed to do it, you will see the bottom there the Sharpie gets removed evenly and consistently from heel to tip all the way through. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Perfect. So we've gone over the stone setup. We've gone over body positioning. We've gone over grips. And we've gone over basic movement, right? So we're going to pinch grip, index finger to the spine, thumb down towards the heel, body positioning such. 45-degree angle of approach, 10 to 15-degree angle of sharpening, 2 to 3 fingers as close to the edge as possible, straight forward, straight back, straight forward, straight back. This hand is going to be responsible for angles. This hand is going to be responsible for pressure. I don't want to have this hand applying pressure so much because it's going to have a tendency to either press down or lift up on the handle and not have my pressure distributed evenly over the surface of the stone. So I want to focus on my pressure being in this hand here, and I want to keep this hand over the center line of the stone so I have even and consistent pressure distribution over the surface of the stone. As much as possible, I want my pressure to be on the edge trailing stroke, and I want to relax on the edge leading stroke. That doesn't mean I have to lift up when I do it, but I apply pressure, I relax a little bit. I apply pressure, I relax a little bit. And I work my way up towards the tip of the knife. All right? Again, you can crawl your fingers like I'm doing here, or you can do a little bit, stop, do a little bit, stop, do a little bit. You don't have to count the number of strokes you're doing. Our goal is to form a burr that is even and consistent from heel to tip. So that is the metric that we are going to use to judge our work. So, doing this sharp. As I come up towards the tip, there are a couple of different ways I like to sharpen the tips of knives, and I'm going to show you 2 of those ways right now. One way is that I can do this motion here, breaking my wrist, bringing my elbow out like this, and lifting up and rotating towards the tip as I go. Here at the top, I can stop and make sure, did I over-rotate, did I under-rotate? I can look and see where I am, and I can come back down. All the way back down into the angle that I was sharpening it before. And you can hear this swishing sound, and it's very different from just doing this, right? This versus this. I want to make sure I'm connecting those things so I don't end up with like a tip that's like this and the rest of my knife like that. I want it to be a smooth transition all the way through. That's one way. The other way I like to do it is as I come up, I'll tuck my arm inside. And as I tuck my arm inside, on my backstroke, I can rotate my wrist. And by rotating my wrist, that does my lifting up and rotating towards the spine. And as I come forward, I rotate back into that same angle that I was sharpening at before. I like this because it's economy of motion. There's less movement going on, less things I have to worry about going wrong. It's much easier for me to do. Doesn't matter what you do. You can find another way of doing it. As long as you lift up and rotate back towards the spine, that's what matters. Now we're going to feel for a burr. We want to make sure the burr is even and consistent from heel to tip. I somehow did a good job there. All right. When we feel for a burr, this is the way we want to do it. We want to use our index finger and our middle finger, not our thumb. Thumbs are much less sensitive. We're going to hold the knife in your dominant hand. You're going to place your thumb on the side that you sharpened. And you're going to take your index finger and middle finger and run them up along the side of the blade this way. Not over the edge this way. Sure as hell not laterally and not towards the edge at all. Unless you don't like your fingertips, I guess. This way. And what you're looking for is a little piece of metal kind of flipping over and grabbing at your fingertips. It's not perfect. Whatever. You guys will feel it anyways. I'm going to pass this around. I want you to feel both sides. So dominant hand, thumb on the side that we sharpened, fingers up across the edge this way, all the way through from the heel to the tip. And on the flip side, same thing. Dominant hand, finger on the other side, and run your fingers this way. Okay? I'm going to pass this around, and I want you guys to feel both sides of the knife. Let me know. Can you feel it? Is it there? This is what you're looking for results-wise. If you're not sure that you formed a burr, like you're just not 100% sure you got it, keep going until you're 100% sure. In the beginning, you might waste a little bit more metal, but you have a metric by which you can be sure that you're getting good results. Having that kind of metric by which you can judge your work is more important than like any kind of preservation of metal in the long term, because then you know I will be getting good results as I move forward. While we're passing this around, are there any questions you guys have so far about anything we've gone over? Or just anything about sharpening in general that you guys are curious about that I haven't gotten to yet? Anything at all?
Are the motions different when you're working with a smaller blade, or is it like
No, same shit. Yeah. Grips are a little bit trickier because you have less space to do stuff. Obviously, there's not as much room for your fingers on the blade, but otherwise it's the same thing. As much as possible, you want to keep that consistent. There are some knives that are really tricky to do on stone, so like bird's beak paring knives. Those are really tricky, and you can use the edge of a stone, running in an edge trailing motion across to do that kind of stuff. Serrated knives are also not easy to do on stones, and in fact, they're just really a time-consuming pain in the ass in general. So if you can pay someone to do that stuff for you, not me, I will not do that. Anyone else? That's probably better. But if you ever do want to do that stuff, the way to do it is this. You'll grab a dowel rod from like Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, that's roughly the same size as the groove in your serration. You'll color in each serration with Sharpie. You'll grab some sandpaper. You just fucking go at it, right? Until you form a burr that's even and consistent. And on the backside, on your finishing stone, you'll do a stropping motion. removing the burr. It's really time consuming, but it is possible to do. But just don't, those things don't work as well on stones. Ceramic knives also, like if you have one of those like white or black ceramic knives, those are really difficult to sharpen, both because they're extremely hard, so you have to use diamond as an abrasive for them, but also because diamond doesn't form a burr. So it's very difficult to have a metric by which to judge, have I done a good job or not? And instead what you'll see is that as you start to bring that apex closer together, you just get like a sudden increase in sharpness when it kind of like apexes, and then like, hey, I'm there. But it's time consuming and difficult to do. So if you have those are also quite tricky to do. Are there any other things you guys struggle with in your sharpening?
What were you saying about the broken tip? You said you used the back of the
Yeah, so when the tip of the knife is broken, so like say I snap off like this much of my tip, even a small amount, doesn't matter. Instead of fixing it from the edge side here, I'm going to fix it from the spine side. So I just want to make sure I start far enough back so that it doesn't look like a weird fucked up santoku. And I'll just, you can draw with a Sharpie like the shape that you're looking for. And then with, sandpaper or something, you can grind all the way through, reshaping the tip. And that way, your knife doesn't become thicker behind the edge. You don't change the edge profile of your knife at all. You just have a tip again. So that's the way to do it, and it's one of the faster, easier ways to do that kind of thing. Everyone so far was able to feel that burr, and it feels like pretty consistent from heel to tip. I think the heel was like a little bit weaker, like right at the very heel, but otherwise it's pretty good. If you notice that it's strong in one area and weak in another area, you want to do the entire side again, but you'll focus more on the areas that were weak and less on the areas that were strong. If you just target that certain area, you're much more likely to have a faceted bevel where you're like at this angle in this one area and this angle in this other area, it gets all kinds of messed up. So do the whole thing over, but focus more on the areas that were weak and less on the areas that were strong. The end goal, when you're ready to switch to the next side or the next stone or whatever, is that you formed a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip, and that the scratch pattern that you see, so if you look like closely at the scratches on the bevel, run kind of like this, is what you expect from that stone. So coarse stone, coarse scratches, medium stone, medium scratches, fine stone, fine scratches. And when you move from coarse to medium, you're going to take time on that medium grit stone to remove the coarse scratches. When the coarse scratches are gone and you have a burr that's even and consistent, then you move to the next one. And so those are the kind of metrics that you're using to judge, am I done? Am I ready to move on? Have I done a good job? That in conjunction with the Sharpie will really help you figure out where you stand. And I think also, like, now you guys understand that the mistakes are really straightforward and simple. And once you know what they are, like, what to do about them is just like the opposite. Angle too high, lower that shit. Angle too low, raise that shit up. It's like very simple, straightforward problem solving. So you just have to be mindful and introspective as you sharpen. You really pay attention to stuff. Cool? All right. So we just sharpened the first side of the knife. Thank you. Now we're going to do the next side of the knife. So I'm going to start again from the pinch grip, but this time instead of my index finger to the spine, I'm going to move my thumb to the spine and my index finger down at the heel. Some people also prefer to switch hands, and if you feel comfortable switching hands, you just mirror everything that you did on the opposite side. That's totally fine. Absolutely acceptable way to do things. I tend to not switch hands as much, so I will move my thumb here, my index finger here. In this case, my angle of approach cannot be this 45 degrees because the handle gets in the way, right? So I'm going to start off perpendicular. Perpendicular presents some problems. One, my motion being straightforward and backward is the same way the knife wobbles. So I have to be a little bit more careful about my angle consistency. And two, I have less surface area contact. So I'll start off here, 2 to 3 fingers as close to the edge as possible. Pressure on my edge trailing, relax on my edge leading. As soon as I have room to clear back into that 45-ish degree angle of approach, I'll do that. So I just start here and then come here, all right? As I come up towards the tip, I have to start to make that tip adjustment again. And there are a few different ways you can do that. One, you can do small incremental adjustments. So for example, I can start sharpening here, forward, backward, make the tiniest of adjustments, lifting up and rotating back towards the spine. And so now I'm sharpening here, forward, backward, and then here, forward, backward. And I start to make those small adjustments all the way through. So forward, backward, tiny adjustment, forward, backward, tiny adjustment as I come up towards the tip of the knife. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, as you come up towards the tip, take a step to the side and then use that same rocking motion like this. And again, you can hear that swishing sound at the end as I rock all the way back into the same angle I was doing, which is distinct from the sound of this, right, versus this. So listen when you're sharpening. If you feel your thumb touching the stone when you're doing this kind of thing, your thumb will start bleeding. So raise that shit up a little bit. Or just develop wicked calluses. That has been my solution to this. It's funny, when I stopped cooking, it took like 2-3 years for like the calluses to go away. And then now I have like different calluses, and they're like just as bad as the old ones were. All right. So I'm going to feel again for a burr. Is it even and consistent from heel to tip? Cool. I'm done with this side, right? I have a burr that's even and consistent from heel to tip. So I'm going to move from whatever stone I was on to my next stone in the progression. So we're going, in this case, from medium to fine. You can go from coarse to medium to fine. Doesn't really matter. As I do this, I'm going to form a burr, not intentionally on each stone. Like it's not that I'm looking to form a burr each time I do it, but it will happen. But I'm also looking to make sure that scratch pattern is more refined. And so you'll look closely at the edge, and ideally you have some light around to look at that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it's exactly the same process. Coarse, medium, fine, doesn't really matter. The process is the same. Starting with the grip, straight forward, straight backward, pressure on the edge trailing stroke, adjust up for the tip. Check my work. Feel for a burr. Should be a little bit smaller, but still looking for even and consistent. Flip over to the other side. Same thing. I brought stones that were extremely fast today so I could get through this really quickly. Expect to spend more time than I'm spending here. Also, I'm probably a little bit more consistent with angle control than you guys are. But if you're spending like 30 minutes per knife on sharpening, you're doing something wrong. All right, there's something going wrong there. You should be somewhere around like 10 minutes, plus or minus a little bit. 15 maybe, 20 like on the long side. When you get really fast and stuff, it can be a sub 5 minutes, you know? So just be reasonable with the time, but you don't need to spend 30 minutes or an hour doing stuff. If you're doing that, chances are you're making some kind of serious mistake. All right, so again, feeling for a burr, making sure it's even and consistent from heel to tip. All right, now I've gone through my progression, coarse, medium, fine. Now I want to go through some additional steps to weaken the burr's connection to the edge, make it as small as possible, and then remove it. So instead of having some floppy shit hanging off the edge of my knife, I want a clean, stable apex that will hold up with board contact and stay sharp for a long period of time. There are a number of ways to do this. I'm going to show you my favorite way. My favorite way involves a blue non-scratch sponge. Not the green ones, the blue ones. The blue ones have no abrasive on this side, so it's just like extruded plastic all woven together. You can also use like hard felt or a wine cork or whatever. But the gist of it is this. What we're going to do is a stropping motion. So I mentioned to you before, stropping motions are edge trailing and cover the entire length of the knife. We're going to alternate strokes on each side, and we're going to bend that for back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And by doing so, we'll make its connection to the edge much weaker, but we'll also make it much smaller in the process. We're going to do this until we can't feel the burr anymore. Doesn't mean that it's gone. It just means that it's either straight or so small that we can't feel it. So that's going to look something like this. So I can either start in this corner over here, the lower left-hand corner of the stone, and kind of like a reverse J or L, come all the way around here. So I've lifted up and rotated back, and I work back into my angle here. I can start here in the lower right-hand corner and just come straight across like this. Doesn't matter. Pick one. On the back side, I can come here, lifting up as I come towards the tip, rotating back towards the spine. I can do the reverse of that kind of J stroke, or I can do the reverse of this thing over here. Doesn't really matter. I'm going to do one on one side, one on the other side, one on one side, one on the other side. Same angle that I was sharpening at. When you're learning how to do this, stop, dry the shit off, color on both sides, do one time on each side, look at your work, dry it off, color on both sides, do it again and again and again until you get comfortable with that angle consistency. When you do, go for it. I recommend picking an arbitrary number between 5 and 10. Just do that number of sets and then feel. Can I still feel a burr? If so, do a little bit more. If not, then we can move on to the next part of the process. So let's get to a place where we can't feel a burr anymore. Okay, cool. I can't feel a burr anymore. So this is the part where I want to remove it. So like I said, you can use wine cork. I have some here, like this. And you can take that and you can just kind of slice through the wine cork a few times. And the first time it won't feel as sharp. And as you do it a few times, you'll start to feel like it gets sharper and sharper as it goes. That's because this is helping to remove the burr. This way, this is like the idiot-proof method of burr removal. So like I would tell anyone to start here because if you do this, I know the results will be good. It's very hard to fuck this up. Higher angle than you're sharpening at, just light pressure and kind of like swipe the edge along this. The plastic isn't that hard. It's not going to fuck up your edge. But because you've done a good job at making the burr really small, making its connection to the edge weak, it will come off pretty quickly and easily. So do that. And then, just to be sure that we didn't mess anything up, we'll go back and do maybe like 1 or 2 more swipes on there. And that's it. Now, we have a sharp knife. If you like to use strops, like leather strops or your jeans or something like that, you can do that kind of stuff. So like sometimes I'll grab a kitchen towel and I'll step on it and pull it taut and just kind of swipe the knife against it. This is a leather strop. I have one side that has no abrasive load on it and the other side that has some chromium oxide. When you have abrasives like chromium oxide, you'll lose a lot more bites. The edge will feel sharper for sure, but you're not going to have that same kind of aggressive toothy edge. When you have ones that aren't loaded up, you'll lose a little bit of bite, not a huge amount of bite. And if you do that, slightly higher angle than you were sharpening at, edge trailing strokes, light pressure, like this. All right. So how do you tell if your stuff is sharp? Go cut food. See how it works. You can cut paper if you want. Paper's not going to tell you how it's going to work through food, but it will tell you if you have like little nicks or chips in the edge, or if it feels different as it goes through the paper in one part than the other, you know you didn't do a consistent or even job at that, right? In Japan, a lot of the people use their thumbnail or their hair. I have no hair, so I can't really show you this, but they'll grab the knife and they'll just kind of like see how it digs into the hair on the back of their head. Weirds me out. The thumbnail weirds people out too. What you'll do is you'll take the knife and you put it against your thumbnail and you pull ever so lightly. And when the knife is sharp and it has the appropriate amount of bite for kitchen use, it digs into your thumbnail like tape. It feels just sticky. It doesn't want to slide all over. If it's skidding all over, it's either dull or it's overly polished where it doesn't have any bite to it. Do you guys want to feel what that feels like? Anyone? If anyone wants to feel, come on up and I will show you what that feels like. Cool. Let me grab your thumb.
Yep.
Perfect. So when you're here, you can see like it just doesn't slide around at all, right? So it digs in. That's it. What's nice about that is a really convenient way you can see like, hey, did I get to where I wanted to be or not? Again, cutting food is the best thing you can do, but this is a quick, easy way to test. You can also take the knife and flex it against your thumbnail like this and rock your thumbnail underneath. If the knife is extremely thin, like a Yanagi-ba or a really thin double bevel knife, you'll see the knife flex at the edge a little bit under your thumbnail with the pressure. If you see that, you just know, hey, my knife is really thin at the edge. It's going to be a little bit more fragile or brittle, but it's going to cut really well. So those kinds of things will help you get a good sense of where you stand in that regard. If you see when you do that something bends up and stays bent, you got to go back to the burr removal process though. Cool? So that is taking stuff from dull to sharp. And that is that. All right, let me just make sure I got through everything that I wanted to go through. All right, check your work frequently. You don't have to go fast when you're sharpening. You don't want to go super slow either because you're going to make a lot of mistakes if you're just like really, really slow and methodical with stuff. Find a comfortable pace. I tell people, find music you like. I listen to a lot of booty music when I do it. You know, it's Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion. It can be merengue. Merengue works really well too. Stuff that you would do like a running playlist to, right? Like, it doesn't have to be good. Like, I know it's not good music, but it's the kind of stuff that like you can jog to and it gets you into a good rhythm. That can be really helpful at just helping you be relaxed. I think when people get really tense and uptight about stuff, they make a lot more mistakes. So just loose, relaxed, have fun with it. But don't try and rush through stuff. Rushing through stuff is not necessarily the best way to go. Make sure you reapply Sharpie regularly. When you're done and you want to get rid of the Sharpie, grab a cotton pad and some acetone. That's the easiest way to clean that kind of stuff up. All right, it's faster than any other method that I found thus far. When you look at the blade, you know, closely visually inspect stuff. If you see faceting, like if you can see that one angle was a little bit different than another angle on one side of the knife, try and fix that kind of angle consistency as you sharpen. Cool. Feel like we got through everything that I wanted to get through. Does anyone here use carbon steel knives, things that can rust or be reactive with acidic foods? Perfect. Has anyone ever gone over care or maintenance with you with those things?
I got a Bob Kramer one, and so I have the little like Japanese stones, like you rub them.
Cool. So there's a little bit more to it than just that. And what I'm going to go over is like the way to work with this kind of stuff. But what I'm going to tell him is applicable to anyone using a stainless steel knife. And it's just a function of like how to work clean and organized when you're doing stuff. So when you have carbon steel knives, you are dealing with things that can be prone to rust. So if you leave the knife wet or dirty when it's not in your hand cutting shit, it's going to rust and it's going to be like red, orange stuff. But when it is in your hand cutting stuff, you will also see non-corrosive oxidization. So not something that pits away at the blade, but still oxidization. That's the formation of patina. And on the foods you cut, they will also oxidize. So you'll see brown or black, and the taste and smell will change as you go. And so there's a workflow for mitigating those kinds of things. So on your cutting board, in the lower right-hand corner of your board, or left-hand corner of your board in your case, you have a damp towel folded up, and you have a dry towel nearby. And as you cut, cut, wipe, cut, wipe, cut, wipe. When you're done, wipe clean, wipe dry, put it down. So it's never being left wet or dirty when it's not in your hand cutting stuff. And that will help you mitigate the buildup of acidic food on the blade and manage that reactivity. The more acidic the food is, the more frequently you wipe off. I use what's it called? Towels, kitchen towels, paper towels. That's the word. You know, because you don't want to have cross-contamination, so you want to change that stuff out like pretty regularly. Also, the health department is not down with that kind of like having stuff on the board. So I've always kept a sandy bucket nearby. So that, you know, no matter what, I'm like, hey, I'm cleaning, you know, have stuff that way. So, you know, be mindful of your environment, be mindful of like safety and cleanliness as you go, trying to have cross-contamination as you go. But that helps in terms of mitigating that kind of stuff. Oxidization will continue to occur long after you're done cutting, so you'll see patina form on the knife long after you're done cutting. If you don't mind the way that looks, the more patina sets in, you have a passive layer of oxidized steel, the less reactive the knife will be. But every time you sharpen it or clean that stuff off, it will become reactive again. If you want things to look clean or shiny, like I was in a lot of open kitchens, and I found that, working in front of customers, you want to put forward that face of like, everything is perfect, like my nails are done, my hair is shaved, like everything is clean. And I wanted my knives to be reflective of that as well, so I would always polish everything off. Metal polishes like flitz or semi-chrome, and again, some cotton pads, will take off all that rust, patina, so on and so forth, without scratching up the knife. So rust erasers, like what you're using, they scratch the blade. So if you don't follow the scratch around the blade, you can really see how that stuff goes. But even then, it still causes some scratching. You got to make sure that you're careful and consistent with that kind of stuff. Metal polishes don't do that in quite the same way. So if it's light patina or light rust, this will work. If it's deeper, the rust erasers will work better for that kind of stuff. When you're storing them, you want to give them a light coating of either mineral oil or traditionally camellia oil, no food-based oils. And the idea is that layer of oil will stop moisture from settling on the blade. Here in LA, it's pretty dry. You don't have to worry as much. But if you're closer to the beach or you live in like Florida or somewhere where it's hot and humid, you really want to be on top of that frequent oiling. And that's pretty much it. For the foods, if you use them right away, no stress, right? But if you don't use them right away, oxidization will continue with the food for a long time as well. So if it's a food that you can rinse off prior to use and it doesn't fuck up the whole use of that food, do that. If it's a food that you can't rinse off and you still need to keep it for a long time, keep it as cold as possible. And that will slow down the oxidization process. So, if you're going to cut a bunch of stuff and it's just going to be sitting in like a 9-pound on your station for a long time, make sure it stays cold. Make sure you're on top of that. Or if you can rinse it off before you do stuff. Cool. The handles on a lot of Japanese knives and the wooden sheaths with them are often untreated natural wood. And so from time to time, the woods from that will evaporate or leach out, especially when you wash things with soap and water. You can wash stuff, by the way, with soap and water. And if you do wash your knife with soap and water, finish it with like hot water, like boiling water, because it evaporates more quickly, and so you won't have water sitting on the blade for quite as long. But when the handles or sayas, the wooden sheaths, start to look or feel dry, you can put a little bit of mineral oil or camellia on them and just wipe off the excess, and that will replenish the natural oils in the wood. I use a mixture of beeswax and mineral oil. It's like 1:3, 1:4 ratio of beeswax and mineral oil. Just heat it up in like a bane, let it melt until it's homogeneous, mix it together, throw it in a mason jar. It's really easy to use, but that will help keep those wood things in good shape for a long period of time. Same for wood cutting boards. If you have a wood cutting board, those things also need to be oiled periodically. You can use the same kind of stuff for that. I think that is everything that I wanted to get through with you guys. So, are there questions that you guys have? Things you want to go over? Knives that you have want to take a look at? Help fixing stuff? What's up? What can I do for you guys?
Well, I was curious on single bevel knives.
Yeah.
How to deal with sharpening those, especially keeping a flat, bevel
Yeah.
versus.
So, single bevel knives look something like this. The backside sharpening and front side sharpening are going to be very different. There are two main kinds of sharpening that you'll see for single bevel knives, and they're called betatogi and hamaguri. Betatogi, the concept of betatogi is that you sharpen from the shinogi line, that's this ridge here, all the way down to the edge, flat on the stone. So I'll place the knife down on the stone flat, and I will sharpen, making contact with that entire area until I form a burr evenly and consistently from heel to tip in the same way. All right. Betatogi is easy, relatively speaking, but any mistake that you make on the shinogi line will show up in the edge, and vice versa. Anything that goes on the edge will show up in the shinogi line. So if you have a raise up in the edge, you have a raise up in the shinogi line, and vice versa. Betatogi also yields a knife that's a little bit more fragile or brittle because it's a slightly more acute angle at the very edge of the knife, and food sticks a little bit more to the sides because it's totally flat. So the preferred method for most professional sharpeners in Japan is called hamaguri, and hamaguri is an independent sharpening from roughly the shinogi line down about to the lamination line, or like halfway to 2/3 down the blade, and then a slight adjustment in where your pressure is applied, so not necessarily lifting up the angle, but I apply first pressure here, then I apply pressure here. And so I'm sharpening the upper and lower sections kind of independently. And that gives me independent control over the edge and the shinogi line, so I don't have to have those mistakes tied together. And those angles are very close together, so they essentially kind of end up blending together naturally, which is how this one is sharpened. You can't tell that there's two angles on here, but there are. But it looks consistent and even. And what that does is it creates a slight compound convex bevel that's a little bit more tough and durable because it's not quite as acute at the edge and does a little bit better job at food release. So on the coarse stone, I would do upper, lower, and then I would flip the knife over. On the back side, I'll only sharpen this on finishing stones. It's hollow ground. You want to make contact with the area around the rim, but because the hollow ground is limited real estate, you don't want to overdo it. So by only using a finishing stone, you can preserve that hollow ground bit for as long as possible. So coarse, fine. On the backside, it goes flat on the stone. You're never lifting up. Lifting up is like one of the fucking worst things you can do, and it's a big pain in the ass to fix, so flat. Fingers stay on the shinogi line. Your pressure is on the push, so your pressure is edge trailing and relax, or pressure is edge leading, relax, edge trailing. It's the opposite, right? And you go through. So coarse, coarse, fine. Medium, medium, fine. Fine, fine, fine. Micro bevel, if you want to apply it, would be at that kind of much higher angle, and then the backside again. And that's the process that you would do for that. The tip adjustment is still lifting up and rotating back towards the spine, but there are a few more mistakes you can make. On the upside, though, the angle's kind of already built in, so you don't have to worry about what that is. It's just like it's there for you to do. You just have to follow it. You want to make sure that the edge raises up at the same rate that the shinogi line raises up. So, for example, if you have like a millimeter chip in the edge, shinogi line's got to raise up 1 millimeter to compensate for that. If, say, this is like the backside of my knife and this is the bevel, if the shinogi line raises up faster than the edge, the angle becomes more acute over time. If the edge raises faster than the shinogi line, it becomes less acute. So they have to move up at the same rate over time as you go. Cool?
Yeah, that's great.
Sweet. All right, what else you guys got? Any other questions, things that you want me to take a look at? Cool?
I have a curiosity question.
Yes.
For curved knives, is it possible to...
For what kind of knives?
Curved knives?
Like bird's beak or like recurves? Yeah.
Is it possible to sharpen those as well? Because if you're...
Yeah, I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but what you would do is you would take your stone fixer and you would round over one of the edges of your stone, and then you would use an edge trailing stroke following that curvature as you go. So for knives with like recurves near the heel, like I know Shun makes some slicing knives that look like hunting knives with that kind of bowie recurve, or for bird's beaks, that edge trailing pressure across the edge is the way to do it. Honestly, like when people bring them into the store, I'll do it on a belt grinder at a really low speed so I can control heat, but just because that allows me to conform to that a little bit more easily. But if you want to do it on stone, that's the way to do that kind of stuff on the stone. And then otherwise, the process is the same. Coarse, medium, fine, even inconsistent burr, burr reduction and removal, all the same stuff. Cool?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Is there a place, or maybe, I know you have some stuff on YouTube.
Oh, yeah. On my business cards over here, if you go, the QR code on the back goes to our website, but also there's a link to the website on there. If you click the media section on our website, there's a buttload of videos, like an absolute buttload of videos up on knife sharpening. Some really old ones from like 10, 12 years ago. But Steven's been working on some newer ones with me, with like fancier cameras and multiple angles and stuff. They go through everything that I went through here with you guys. So if there's something you forgot, you can go back there. But you can also call, show up, ask me questions, email me. We're going to put hopefully some or all of this one up so that you guys will be able to reference this kind of stuff as well. So it's just out there. In Japan, everyone's been really kind to me and has spent a lot of time teaching me about this kind of stuff for nothing. Like they just shared information with me as long as I was there and wanting to learn. And I feel like it's important for me to do the same for people here. So I'm always about passing along that information and spending time teaching people. So all of this stuff is out there. If you have trouble finding it, let me know. But there's a buttload of videos. Cool? Cool. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm going to be packing up for the next little bit, but if there are questions or you have knives you want me to take a look at, come and hit me up, all right? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.